So here's one I see a lot. This one's from Penn Jillette. It says this: "The question I get asked by religious people all the time is, without God, what's to stop me from raping all I want? And my answer is, I do rape all I want, and the amount I want is 0. And I do murder all I want, and the amount I want is 0. The fact that these people think that if they didn't have this person watching over them, that they would go on killing, raping rampages is the most self-demeaning thing I can imagine." Penn Jillette. Well, here's why that doesn't work. Penn Jillette makes an interesting statement here, but it doesn't really hold up to scrutiny if you look closely. Now, he starts off by listing a couple of sins, and we'll call them sins. They're moral evil, moral atrocity. It's good versus evil. There's sins for the sake of simplicity. He says, I commit these sins as much as I want to, and the amount that I want to commit these sins is 0. So he doesn't want to sin, therefore he doesn't sin. I do wonder if that's the only thing preventing him from sinning. Then he then goes on to make this statement that he thinks that it's self-demeaning. The most self-demeaning thing that I can imagine is what he says. He thinks it's self-demeaning for people to consider that there might need to be an external moral arbiter or an external moral enforcer. But that's what society is made up of. That's what the police forces, the judicial branch of the government, is there to say, if you go and murder somebody, this is the consequence for your action. It's not good, it's not fun, so don't do it. And for some people, they don't want to murder anybody, so they don't murder anybody. Good for them, good for Penn Jillette. And some people do want to murder some people. And this is why people murder each other. Like, this may be shocking to you, but there are actual people who commit moral atrocities. There are actual people who want to do bad things. And some of these people are prevented by external sources, by as to use his words, by a person watching over them, by a person who externally would try to prevent them from committing these sins. There are people who are prevented from crime by the existence of a police force. They don't want to get caught, so they don't do a sin. So Penn Jillette's argument doesn't really hold up here. I mean, it's fantastic that he doesn't want to murder anybody, but that only applies to him. And what if there is a sin that he does want to do? What if there's a sin that he wants to do? What's going to prevent him from doing that? If the only thing that stands in his way is just, I want to do this thing, so I'm going to do it. I don't want to do that thing, so I'm not going to do it. Then what's to prevent him from doing something bad that he actually wants to do? And this comes to a bigger question. How do we know what's bad? How do we know what's right and wrong? Now, before you tell me, oh, you just look in your heart and figure it out. It doesn't work like that. And here's why. Because your heart and my heart are not the same. If you feel that something is wrong, and I feel that that is not wrong, which one of us is correct? If right and wrong is just based on what you feel or what I feel, we're really just talking about preferences. I'm saying, I would prefer that you not murder me, please. And you say, well, I would prefer that I do murder you, please, and thank you. Well, we're at an impasse here because my moral code, my subjective feeling is different than your moral code, your subjective feeling. So how do we know which one of us is right and wrong? Well, we obviously can't figure out what's right and wrong just by looking in our hearts and checking our feelings. That doesn't work. You need an external source. You need somebody who would actually know what we ought and ought not do. And how do we find this person? They're not in government. They're not in the police force. They're not even a collection of people who all get together in a society and say, we all agree together that this is going to be a law, that that you're not allowed to ride a horse on Tuesday. Right? That's not a source of objective morality. That's just people agreeing on subjective moral ideas. The only way you know what someone ought and ought not do is when you go to the source. Let me explain it like this. If you have a book The book was written by someone. The one who writes the book, the author who writes the book, knows what he wants the book to mean, or knows what she wants the book to mean. Now, people may come by later and say, well, I think that Shakespeare meant that this is all an allegory for the struggles of the pre-post-industrial millennium, whatever. You may come up with all kinds of crazy ideas, but the fact of the matter is that the only person who knows for a fact what exactly that book was supposed to mean is the one who wrote the book. When he wrote the book, he wrote it for a purpose. He wrote it to convey information. Same thing with an artist. An artist paints a painting, and they want that painting to elicit a certain emotion. They alone objectively can say, that painting is supposed to make you sad. You can say, well, that painting makes me happy. Well, it's not what it's supposed to do. The painting very well may make you happy, but it's supposed to make you sad. What about somebody who makes a machine? Some fabricator who creates, it's got all these gears and levers and all this other stuff. He knows how that machine is supposed to function. He knows how the gears are supposed to interconnect and turn, what they're supposed to do. Now, you very well can use a machine for a purpose that it was not intended for. But the way you know what a machine was made for and how it is supposed to function is going back to the source, going back to the fabricator, going back to the painter, going back to the author of the book, and in your case, going back to your creator. You see, the only one who can determine how you ought to behave, how you ought to interact with one another, is the person who made you. It's as simple as that. And you can say, well, if morality is subjective if it comes from you, and morality is subjective if it comes from me, how come it's not subjective if it comes from God? Because God isn't deciding morality for himself in this case. What God is doing is he is creating something. And this something that he's creating, he knows exactly how it's supposed to fit together and how it's supposed to work. He knows how your biology is supposed to work. He knows how your morality is supposed to work. He knows how you ought to behave. Okay, great. Now we've got a creator who knows what we ought to do. How are we supposed to know that? We can't read minds. At least I can't. And we know that we can't just look in our hearts and feel our way to the truth. So how are we supposed to know? Well, I'm glad you asked. The only way to know the ought, the intent of a creation, is when it is communicated by that creator. Yeah, you're following along now. So, when God communicates what you ought and ought not do, let's say on a mountain somewhere on stone tablets, he gives like a list of 10 things that he's like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, do this, right? This creator has communicated how you ought to function. Now, it goes beyond the 10 commandments. The entire Bible, this is why you have to look to an external source. This is why you can look in the Bible, because the Bible is a communication of God's intent for how you were supposed to live your life, what you were supposed to be, what you were created for. What is the meaning of life? What is your purpose? How are you supposed to act? What are you supposed to do? These all are written by the one who made you. This is all decided by the one who made you, and it's given to us in the Bible. So as much as you want to just say, well, that's pathetic that you have to look to an external source to know what's right and wrong. I know what's right and wrong in my heart. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But how can you check? How can you know for sure? You don't. you don't. So maybe don't rely on your own sort of personal feelings to know what right and wrong is. Look to an objective source. And if you say, well, I commit this sin as much as I want to, and I want to commit it zero amounts of time, therefore, I think it's preposterous that anybody needs to have an external moral enforcer out there to curb them from doing right and wrong. I mean, again, you're arguing against human nature here. Like, every society basically has had a police force or somebody who will enact judgment, enact justice, who will sort out when somebody does something wrong. So again, I mean, I'm sorry, Penn Jillette. I think you're a very entertaining actor and magician and juggler, but this argument just does not hold up. It was very cleverly worded, and I'm sure it's very convincing to a lot of people, but it just doesn't work, my man. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. Hopefully that helped you guys understand some of this. You take care.